Folks, welcome, and thank you for joining us today. Really do appreciate it. Joining the Crush the Quo webinar series. In our webinar today, our speaker, Tim Ohai, will be covering how to help your customers address one of their biggest challenges, seeing what they don't see. According to some research done by Harvard, 95% of employees simply do not understand or even aware of their company strategy. And this creates massive disruption in their decision-making and their buying journeys. So what do we do as sellers? How do we step in? How do we create some clarity? How do we help our customers make good decisions? So with that, I'm very happy to introduce to you Tim Ohai. You all know Tim. Tim is a consultant, a coach, an author, and a speaker. And he has spent many years helping other leaders around the world figure out what is getting in the way of unleashing the potential of their teams and even their own lives, and then actually doing something about it. And so he has this innovative approach to blending business best practices with core psychological truths that both inspire and provoke. And so with that, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to hand over to you, Tim, to lead us through the chat and conversation about helping your customers make good decisions.
Thank you, Catherine. It's a pleasure to see everybody today, especially those of you I know. And for those who are watching later, aloha, as we say on the other side of the world. This topic today is a build off of a previous webinar that I did, I think, on this series. I think it was one of the first episodes. So if you want to dig deeper into anything I talk about at the beginning, please go back and watch that episode. There's a lot more depth that's covered. And today we set it up to be much more of a conversation and to build off that topic, especially as we get into where our customers are living and what they're trying to do. So without further ado, let me share my screen. So let's talk about how we help our customers make good decisions. And as I mentioned, this builds off the idea that that they're trying to make a good decision. They're trying to do good things, but it's tough for them, even in their own internal dialogue, their own internal discussions around what do we do, when do we do it, how do we do it? All of those different things come into play. And sellers may or may not even be involved in any of that. Great sellers are. You've positioned yourself as a great advisor, but many of us are not. We show up much later in the cycle, much later in the journey, and we try to help them make a decision. And we're finding increasingly more and more decisions are winding up with no decision. And as my good friend Dave Brock likes to say, if we can just tackle that 60% that doesn't know what to do, we'll have great growth. So that's the spirit what we're going to tackle today. So let me dive in. And I have to begin with a little bit of review of just some core concepts. The first one is, what does the word strategy mean? We hear the word all the time, and frankly, it's overused. Sometimes it just means plan. Sometimes it means a really big strategy. But strategy can mean so many different things at so many different altitudes of the organization. At some points, it's the Uber strategy that everything's trying to run off. And then sometimes it's a strategy of just that team and what we're trying to do on our local market. So I want to break it down and take a moment and go to the dictionary and make fun of it a little bit, because quite frankly, I think this definition here from dictionary.com, very classic, very academically solid, very incomplete at best. The reality is we can put plans together, but they never stay the same. Whatever we experience at our year beginning meeting, 2 to 3 months later, all of a sudden the edges are starting to unravel and we're experiencing a completely different reality, so that by mid-year we're changing the strategy or we're tweaking the strategy because the plan just isn't vibrant and robust enough. So let's go now into Henry Mintzberg's definition that strategy is a pattern in a stream of decisions. And I really want to pause on this. This, to me, is the core element involved. Strategy is about the decisions we make in order to achieve an objective. It's a decision-making science. And our customers are struggling to make those decisions if they don't understand, A, the outcome they're really trying to pursue, and B, they're not clear on how they're going to go do it. How many of us have been in organizations where we get a plan and say, go execute this, and we immediately start tweaking it, and then we get wrapped on the knuckles, or even worse, for not following the plan. We're told to go back to the plan and do the plan. But we all know from real experience that that is not appropriate. That is not going to give us what we need. So the idea here of companies not knowing or understanding their strategy, I think absolutely drives all of the decision making. So if you know some of the literature out there talking about how customers lack confidence, I 110% believe in that. But I think the core issue is because they're not clear on what they're trying to accomplish. So the confidence that they're supposed to be bringing to the decisions they make and the relationships they develop from a strategic level and so on is because they don't understand what they're trying to do and they're making it up on their own. Because in the absence of information, people create their own information. So if this is 95%, and this is research done from Kaplan at Harvard, that 95%, when I saw that, I blew my mind. And yet at the same time, I can rattle off so many customers that I've worked with and even work with now that their strategy is broken, unclear, going in the wrong direction, not effective, not the same between the executive level and the front lines, completely different. Because if you want to know what strategy is, look at what the front lines do. So that's our context for where we're going to go today. And I'll just move this conversation quickly. This is the model that I introduced on the last call. I'll go deep into it. I'm just going to flash it here and very briefly state that fundamentally, we have, there's a typo there on culture. It should actually say clarity. Clarity, empowerment, engagement, accountability, and culture feed each other in a beautiful cycle. And the first place we want to start is at the clarity point. We want to start with clarity and move clarity then into empowerment, and then from empowerment move into engagement, because I cannot empower people if they're not clear on what they're supposed to be doing. And I cannot engage people if they've not been empowered to be successful. And I cannot ask for accountability if people aren't engaged. And I can't drive accountability and leverage the culture of the organization if people aren't willing to be transparent and to own up to what they need to do to make the culture even stronger. And at the same time, culture then feeds the loop around and again.
I have a question about the role of the seller in light of this model. How does the role of sales change in the light of this model?
So we're gonna go deep into this, but let's pause for a moment. Most sellers think that they're to be a trusted advisor. They're there to help solve problems, but our definition of the problem needs to rotate to this model. Our problem isn't just safety or profitability or whatever. It's usually around the strategy that's driving why safety or profitability is a priority. And let's say we have an organization where I'll just go healthcare as an industry. Compliance is a big deal. You've got to stay compliant. You've got to do things. If you lose your compliance, you lose your ability to operate as a business. When people are trying to make decisions that around technology, around services, around training, around a whole host of supplies, compliance drives that. But then sometimes people don't know whether to make that step into a new supplier relationship because they don't know if they're going to protect that compliance or not. But the reality is they're not clear on what compliance really is supposed to be, or they may be clear on what compliance is supposed to be as a standard, but they don't believe they've been empowered to meet it. They don't have the staff. They don't have the time to do the inspections. They don't have the technology to go check the inventory or stay on top of things. And so they're hesitant to commit to anything that isn't status quo because they don't have confidence in the empowerment they have to execute against the expectation that they've told the seller that they're trying to meet, but they themselves don't buy into. And then you run into engagement. Let's say you sell a new technology. Are people going to adopt that new technology? Are they going to use it? Well, first and foremost, have they been engaged in the business and solving the problem to begin with? And when we sell things and we stay at the product level or the solution level to quote the stated problem, but we're not helping them implement, we're not helping them think through how they're going to make decisions to bring that value to life, we're leaving our customers on their own. And what we're finding now in the research from Gartner and others is that customers would rather just not talk to salespeople. They'd rather figure it out on their own.
So why is that? What is that barrier then to customers listening to sellers? What is that barrier?
Well, as you and I have talked, Catherine, the word that keeps coming up in my own observations, but as I talk to customers, it's credibility. It's trust. When I talk to somebody who shows up and they don't have the credibility that I need them to have, credibility around their professionalism, credibility. I mean, I'm increasingly more and more people are talking about I need sellers to be human. I need them to connect. I need to have an emotional connection with them because I have to trust them. If not, send me the brochure. Let your AI do it instead. But if I don't have that trust, that credibility, then I have nothing else. And so now I'm hesitant to make a decision or even to have a good dialogue.
Yeah, you make a very powerful point there. I'm going to digress for a second. AI is obviously a big concern, but you can't build trust with AI like you can with people. And that's something salespeople need to really understand and be encouraged by, because I think a lot of people are worried that AI is going to replace them. And it will if they don't do what you're saying, right?
Yeah, somebody, and I can't remember, just posted this on LinkedIn. It said you won't be replaced by somebody. You won't be replaced by AI. You'll be replaced by somebody using AI. So AI, let's be clear about what AI is and does. AI, and even when we say AI, it's really not AI. A lot of it's machine learning. It's other things that are just automated decision making to help you get through tasks quicker. But the idea of this mental processing is really information processing, but it still doesn't have the human element. And what Shelley, I just see in the chat, calls out as empathy. AI has a long way to go. And as I listen to podcasts from people at MIT and other folks who are talking about trying to figure the algorithm out, the concept of consciousness really comes to the center of the forefront, or the center of the discussion. Consciousness is what we as humans, that's what separates us. We're very conscious beings. We're aware of everything going on around us. And so therefore we're processing and looking for other forms of consciousness. And we can tell when AI is not there or not answering the question. But let's get past the information piece. Let's go back to these elements. Can AI empower me? Can AI engage me? Can AI help me be accountable? We have a long way to go before AI does any of that.
AI relies on one's ability to ask the right questions, but often that's when we get stuck. We get stuck when we don't know the right questions to ask.
Yeah. I'll even go one step underneath that, Shelley. I was on a plane. One of the beautiful things about living in Hawaii is you get a lot of influential people on the flights flying back to and from California. And I got to sit next to a guy and I got to talking to him about how he sees AI getting involved in workflows, not just customer engagement, but actual workflows. And he says, no matter what, AI is limited by the query you give it. It can only do what you tell it to do. If you're not giving it the ability to open up the dialogue and, to your point, Shelley, ask the right questions, it will only ask the questions it's been told to ask. But again, go back to the role of the seller. The role of the seller then is to listen and to be involved in understanding what the root cause issue. So when you go in, first and foremost, the question I ask every single customer is what's the problem we're solving? Who's it important to? And how do they define success? I need clarity right off the bat. And I cannot tell you how often I don't get complete answers from the people I talk to.
The only point I was going to add here, Tim, is in some of the work we do at Bain, the AI almost becomes the same way a pre-sales person would become to a sales rep.
Sure.
They're just giving they're just another viewpoint, and they're consolidating a lot of information and so when you get stuck with questions, it may provoke like, hey, here's some suggested questions that we recommend. But we see like a lot of companies starting to go through the process of basically adding this agent or assistant, you could say, to the rep. And then what's the best way to kind of use that agent to just drive your productivity?
I think that's spot on. And like I said, AI will be used, but it will only go so far. And I actually think the analogy I use with people is like, there was this thing called the automobile that got invented. And when it came on, people freaked out. They didn't know what to do. They made fun of it. They thought it was dangerous. They all these things. And everybody was worried about all the horse jobs that were going to be eliminated because we had this thing called the automobile. And there were a lot of horse jobs that got eliminated, but then there were a lot of automobile jobs that got created. And I got to believe AI will be the same. AI will tackle what I call the low-hanging fruit. Do the research on a customer. Go search the internet for data, quickly pull together a point of view, give a seller a hypothesis to start with. But I think AI, at least with the technology, what it can and cannot do, it's got a long ways to go before it can actually generate credibility. And sellers, that's the role of the sellers, to come in and then find where these elements are getting in the way of their, trending downward in profitability, their competitors, or all those different things that the AI will illuminate and help and ask questions about. But at the end of the day, as a buyer, I need a seller to show up with empathy and insight. And if you don't have that, I'm not going to listen to you. I'll put your stack or your deck next to the stack of the other ones that I have, and maybe not make a decision.
So I guess the next question I have for you around this is, what is the biggest barrier that buyers internally have to navigate?
It's funny to me, and I'll leave this model up and then I'll take it down. It's those top two boxes. It's the clarity, the lack of clarity, but it's also their own culture. And it's back and forth. And one's a very easy thing to go tackle. One's a very hard thing to go tackle. But you have to navigate both. So there's an element of clarity that is missing at like the research says, at scale. 95% of what's out there is just missing it. So if there's that much of an opportunity, I think we can walk in and help buyers ask the right questions inside. I literally had a customer, very, very large international retailer, huge organization. You want to talk about, they had millions of employees, and getting them to ask the right question within their own internal stakeholders was always the key to opening up the dialogue to get a solution figured out to what we were trying to do. So I think right off the bat, we don't teach people how to create clarity around these things. We teach people how to build a plan, take the plan and go implement the plan, and Gantt charts and project managers. And we have RACI and DACI, and those are good things, but they're missing the core issue of helping our own internal stakeholders navigate and make decisions together and to generate their own clarity. But if their culture's in the way of doing that, how do they navigate around the holes? So when you have a smaller company, and I work with smaller companies where the leadership team is very, very tight, you can make a discussion or bring a discussion to them and make it a top of mind dialogue that can pivot immediately. And then there's very large organizations. I work with very large organizations. You find one group that you can work with. That's very, very hard for sellers to recognize. You have to shift because they often go after logo, right? How big the company is, and I can go sell this. No, you may sell to one group because that's the only group that will allow you to come in and help them create that clarity and navigate their own culture so that they can make a decision.
What's the guiding question we can use to help sellers to ask better questions that lead to clarity?
The ones I use, I mentioned one already, and it's, what's the problem or challenge that we're trying to solve? What's the true definition of that? And getting underneath that opens up a whole host of things. And who's defining that? How do you know? All those different things. And then I go, who owns that problem? Who owns it? That's where it starts getting sideways, because often there may be more than one person who owns that problem. I'll give an example of a large beverage company I worked with. Their corporate wanted to reduce costs, but their field operations were all individually owned as a completely separate division and separate company. And they were trying to maximize production and profitability. So you've got this cost reductions and ramping up and getting more out the door. And they were, so who owned that? We had multiple senior level of stakeholders, plus this whole distributed decision making that was happening at each location one at a time. So when you get into who owns it, that suddenly you get your own people going, oh my gosh, it's not my boss, or it's not the person who asked me to go fix this. It's more than that. Okay, well then let's just pause. Got it. It's going to be complex to navigate, but how is the person that you've named or the people you've named? Here's the big one. How do you define success? What does success look like? And when I say that, I mean specifically, what's the outcome? How are they going to measure that outcome? And what are their requirements? So that if you meet all the requirements, they promise they won't complain about anything else. And that's where I always find the rubber meets the road. When I even as something as simple as a coaching discussion. And I take on engagement, and I'm doing executive coaching with somebody, asking their leader, just what's the outcome you're looking for? I had one leader say to me once, I don't know, Tim, I just want things to get better. Well, that was the clarity that their player had, and they didn't know what better was. They kept trying to do stuff, and they get into what's called bring me a rock. Bring me a rock. You bring a rock, and no, it's too big. So you go find another rock, and no, that's too small. Okay, bring me a rock, and go find it. Well, that one's too dark, and no, that one. Be specific. Provide that clarity on the front end, and getting clarity on what the problem is, who owns it, and their definition of success opens the door to so many other things that will tell you who's who in the zoo. Do they have their own clarity, and not just clarity around the problem, clarity about the roles and who's involved in solving or addressing that. And then I go into empowerment. What are the obstacles to implementation? What are the obstacles to, them feeling empowered that, yes, they understand the expectation, but they also believe they can go solve that or address that challenge. And then that becomes where I start upselling and cross-selling, because in my business, it's about linking services and other groups to help address gaps in the big picture, so that the decision-making chain goes from solving the problem to empowered to do it.
I guess the next question that I would have, as you talk about all of that, is, what are the skills that, sales organizations need, that they should be helping, that we should be helping them develop or recruit for? And are those skills any different to the selling skills that we've been using teaching for the last 30 years?
It's a great question. It's a really big answer. I want to say there's a Japanese word mu, right? The answer to the
you
question.
You say
mu, mu.
Okay.
It means the answer is bigger than the question you're asking, because I always think in terms of mindset, skill set, and activities. And a lot of sales stuff goes after activities, and we teach people how to do those activities, how to prospect, how to present. How many times do we got people go through onboarding and they have to certify in the company pitch? And even though that's just this much of their job, then the skills that drive those activities become paramount. The mindset actually is where I'm finding in my practice and what I'm doing, but also, and frankly, in when I was working at Workday and other places, that mindset was how we released top performers. They thought differently. One of the biggest things is how to walk in and generate quickly a neutral mindset. And that's tough. High performing athletes, or you increasingly hear them talk about how they're working on having a neutral mindset, not a positive mindset. And if anybody like me, a child of the 70s and 80s, it was all about positive mental attitude, and you speak and it was like how you talked and how you, and like, no, be neutral. Neutral says it's neither good nor bad, it just is. This is the situation. So if I have a neutral mindset, that changes even the questions I select, the follow-up questions I select, how I listen, what I interpret, because I'm assuming I'm just getting a piece of something, and I'm not going to lock into something until I have true clarity from a neutral lens of what's really happening. It's neither good nor bad, it just is. Once I have that mindset, now the things like asking great questions, and most importantly, listening. But then I've got to learn how to analyze and diagnose. And a lot of our sellers don't know how to truly analyze. Our best ones do. But how often do we recruit sellers based on their ability to take data and go through it and analyze it and deduce it to some core things? We hope they get it. We try to teach it them, teaching them when we're doing research, element of their onboarding program. And that's the only time we ever teach them how to research. To the point, we're now letting AI do the research because we don't trust sellers to do it right. And actually, AI is doing a better job now of researching customers. I mean, I'm seeing stuff where emails are being generated by AI that are way better written than anything a seller is going to do. So you have communication skills and all those different things. But I go back, it's that neutral mindset. And then from there, how do I determine as a mindset positive outcomes? So it's not staying neutral and go there, but how do I read the situation as it is, and then get a positive outcome? And the positive outcome, maybe I'm not going to sell to the whole logo. I will sell to one division, but that will be a great sale, a great relationship. And long-term, it may grow to 2 divisions, 3 divisions, 4. But I've got to have that mindset that this is what it is. I cannot force a company-wide implementation when I need to just start with a pilot project.
I think sales and marketing has been detached so long, Tim. It's like, how do you get more of a commercial community involved and orchestrate around that?
Yeah.
I think, and the role of AI, like as you just said, in terms of hyper personalizing, I think is also critical. But I think some of these systems have been around for so long, and we've always said they don't work. And how do you get them to work? I think we need a new op model.
Well, isn't this where a lot of the discussion that's coming up around the definition of the customer's journey starts way earlier than we give them credit for. And then also the idea of helping that journey and coming alongside as the group, omni-channel marketing strategy, linking into then the roles that people are equipped to do this and all that stuff. Is that kind of where you're going as well?
Yes, exactly.
In terms of analyzing the data, Tim, what kinds of data should sellers be able to analyze?
So when I'm coming alongside somebody to help them make a decision, I have to look at their context first and foremost, right? So, strategy always exists within a context. So at the risk of stepping on something I don't think is as politically sensitive as it was, say, a year ago, but Russia and Ukraine, right? The context there is what drives everything for what's actually happening in terms of strategy. Russia originally thought they would just roll in and take over, and their context was they didn't have the people they thought they did. They didn't have the skills, and more importantly, they didn't have the command structure in place. So they had a plan of what they were going to do, but their culture said it was top-down decision-making. Nobody's allowed to challenge up. And contrast that with the Ukrainian model that had been trained by the US and other Western countries, and their military was decentralized decision-making. It was like, look, here's the mission. You do what you need to do out in the field and make it work. And so they're literally taking people off the street, joining their own military, and defeating a regular army in embarrassing ways, because the context they gave their players was, you're released, you're empowered, you do what you need to do, we'll support you as much as we can. Now, granted, they were highly motivated, there's that piece as well, but that context stuff you have to understand. So when I go in, I always try to find at least 3 different people who will tell me about the context of their company. Tell me what's going on, what's it like to work here, what's happening? And those 3 people, I'll get enough patterns within those 3 data points that'll tell me enough to go, this is where the strategy that they're trying to achieve is sitting within. So they're sitting in an industry that's doesn't change much, or it's rapidly changing, or was hammered by COVID and they're just trying to come back out of it, or they did really well in COVID and now it's calmed down and they're starting to struggle because everything is shrinking. They're laying people off, they're hiring, like all that contextual stuff I want to understand, so that I can then understand my questions and the context for the questions I want to ask around their strategy.
Okay, so context, that's one set of data. What about like financial information? Do sellers need to do a better job of being able to understand business financial data?
Yeah, I would include that within the context. So the money they're making, if they're public, great. If they're not, it's a little harder, but again, that's where you talk to people. But the idea of going in, looking at their public statements, look at their annual reports, go find out what they've called out as threats in that or trends that they're trying to capitalize on. I'm going to go back to healthcare for an example. Some of that's financial stuff will tell you that they're making money, but you have to do the other contextual work, because healthcare after COVID as an industry in the US lost 1 million nurses. There's not anybody who's using nurses, whether it's insurance companies to hospitals to your local clinic. They don't have enough nurses, let alone techs and everything else. So what is that doing to the decision making and how they're trying to make decisions around how they're going to spend their money? Because they're freaked out just trying to get people to not only come but stay, because now salaries are exploding and all the other stuff. So you've got to go read the industry reports, you've got to look at trends, you've got to look at what's happening at the macro level, and then also you got to look at the region. What's happening in Texas is not what's happening in California, is not what's happening in Massachusetts or Netherlands and England and Germany.
my last question, if I don't remember the one I was going to think of a moment ago, is how does all of this affect sales strategy?
So I would go right actually where Kunal was. Our marketing and sales strategy needs to be completely hooked together as one strategy that's based on this is the point we're trying to get to. And we've got to make sure we're providing the clarity that everybody in the sales and marketing organization needs and all the dependencies that are required. So you go from clarity around the goal and clarity around roles. And most importantly, when you get to role clarity, who has veto authority? One of the most frustrating things I experienced in my last corporate gig was how you can make a decision, have everybody lined up, I mean, up to senior levels, and somebody in another group could veto a decision that would totally like, what the heck? So you need that clarity of goal and clarity of role, especially around veto authority from as early as possible. And marketing and sales need to do that so that when marketing does something and hands it to sales, sales doesn't veto the whole thing and do whatever the hell they want, which I see happening all the time, because they don't like what marketing gave them. Right. So there needs to be that bridge needs to be built. But then secondly, we've got to go deep into how we empower that. And when I talk about empowerment, I talk about people, time, energy, and resources. Do we have the people need? You've got a major empowerment problem because you haven't got clarity. You've got too many things that are being said. Okay, yes, let's go do that. Yes, let's go do that. We don't say no enough. So then when I'm now trying to get the people I need to do this thing, to execute this strategy, I can't get IT to help me because they're overcommitted to some other thing, some other quote strategy that doesn't give them any availability to tweak the CRM or to change the inventory system or to change the customer, the website, the portal. So we don't give them the people they need. We don't give them the time they need to get it done. Okay, we expect this done in 2 quarters. Go. Or we launch at the last minute like, oh my God, we were so busy executing the last thing you gave us. Now you're giving us something else to execute? Goodness gracious. Then you get into the energy involved. And the energy is human. Am I fatigued? Am I confused? Am I happy? Am I, engaged? All that stuff needs to be massaged into how we think. And lastly, the resources, the equipment, the space, and the budget. And if we don't have those things locked in place all the way through and mapped out from the very beginning of the marketing, so we can't just say, we're going to go after this segment. We're going to turn and delight, CTOs. That's who we're going to go sell to. And we're so excited. We're going after CMOs. And we're so excited, But you haven't got all the way through empowering out how that's going to work, which also means the dependencies that you need for people, time, energy, and resources. If you haven't mapped that out, you're literally setting up your strategy to launch and fail. And we have to think differently. And unfortunately, none of this is new.
Right. So that gets right back to my first question, like how much of this is actually new? Very little. And if you can just remind us, what is the biggest struggle in getting all of this? Is it back to culture and clarity? Is that what it always is?
I believe that is to me the biggest rock to go tackle. Now, could we tackle the economy? Could we tackle supply chain and stuff? No. Wheat suddenly became gold, a year ago. And we watched nations suffer and surge as a result of that. Oil and energy and all, I get it. Those are way too big. It's like when I go in the ocean, I respect the ocean. I don't tell the ocean what to do. The ocean tells me what's going to be done that day. And some days are just bad days to get in the water. I don't think we really help our teams to think in a way, mindset-wise, around how do we harmonize what's happening and influence ourselves from a decision-making point of view. Everything is an outcome point of view. And everything is about follow the plan and you'll get the outcome. And I'm like, no, it's a decision-making point of view. And we still have too many skills gaps in our leaders because they weren't promoted because their ability to generate great decision making. They were promoted because they themselves made great decisions. And we over rely on leaders who will be the secret sauce when actually we need to systematize the whole thing because these organizations are full of a generation of people. And it's not just young people. Anybody who's in the workforce now wants to be empowered. That's just from boomers to Gen Z. Everybody wants that now because we realize, hey, this is fun to work in, but we're still not allowing that to happen in our organizational structures. And we wind up with fiefdoms and silos and all these other things as a result.
Yeah, I like Kunal's comment there about the Bain, with Bain being with the price tag that they come in at, they just can break through all of that fiefdom and silos and poor alignment and all the issues. It helps.
Well, it's funny. It's funny how when you start spending money on something, you want the ROI on it. And when it's a strategic something, when the intervention is a Bain, or I'd say a Kupu Solutions is smaller. When you're going to spend money on something, you want to get your ROI. And usually the people who have control of that budget are at a level, everybody has to listen. But then we get into the big part of my practice. It's one thing to say, here's what you need to do. It's another thing to be the leader who can do it. And this is where we didn't have time in the first webinar that I did. This is actually the biggest rock underneath all this. It's the mindset of the executives. If they don't know how to be neutral and define the problem clearly and then have a positive outcome and then choose multiple options for how we can get there and then select the path to get there, that none of this matters. And that's where, if you come in and help a group that's trying to do a turnaround, and I think of somebody on one of the calls, it was a CEO taking over a whole new team. Well, we didn't have time to get into it, but are the players on that team the players they need to be? Do they know how to have a neutral mindset? Or do you still have people? I go back to 5 Dysfunctions of the Team by Patrick Lencioni, and the story he told. He had all these people, all these personalities, very realistic personalities, all interacting with this new CEO and trying to figure out, what to do and how to do it. But what was getting in their way was their lack of neutral thinking when they were trying to figure out what the problem was. Everything became my problem or my stuff. I want what's mine. I want for me. And that survival mindset will absolutely undercut anything you're trying to do, from creating clarity around the strategy and driving better empowerment and engagement and accountability and culture shift.
So could we in a future webinar talk about how you create this neutral mindset? Because I don't think people are familiar with it or aware of it and what it means and its implications. I don't think anyone thinks like that.
We can absolutely do that. But I actually, it's a funny thing to watch it come full circle. As our world is global, we're realizing other cultures think ways that we should be embracing and thinking and adapting. There's one last question from Kunal in my cycle side. How do you evaluate the effectiveness of decision making? I have, yes, I do. But the thing that I go after most, I actually have a survey that you do with employees, and you look for certain behaviors that demonstrate the positive, proactive kind of mindset you want to see out of people coming out of that empowerment. But it boils down to clarity. Give me the goal clarity, and I'll be able to know if I've got a clear set of very short priorities that make sense. And role clarity. Do I know who has decision-making authority and who has veto authority, and are we living that? The empowerment thing is I look at, are we making sure we're covering people, time, energy, resources, and have we mapped out those dependencies? And if we haven't mapped out dependencies, you can't tell me you're managing the people, time, energy, and resources because you haven't mapped them out. Engagement is very much around employees' engagement. Do they believe that what we're doing is the right thing for them and the company? And there's employee surveys and other things you can go there. Accountability goes into the not the fear-based accountability that we try to do, but the trust-based accountability where people are just open and like, yeah, I own it. I think of like the US Navy Blue Angels, after every flight, they have a review, and every single mistake they make by the quarter second, they review. And they're like, yep, that was me. I own it and I'll fix it next time. And that's what I'm looking for in those kind of dialogues and those kind of use of metrics and how then they're applied and actioned. And then culture gets into a whole nother dialogue. But those are the big kind of high level things. Obviously, it can go much deeper in each level, but hopefully that gives you a sense of what you're looking for.
Tim, thank you very, very much for giving us your time and your wisdom and your insights as always. And folks, thank you all for joining. Don't hesitate to ping Tim if there's anything, any questions you have, if you want to have a follow-up call with him, of course, and my team is available for any questions and follow-up as well. With that, I bid you all good day or good night or good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining.